What was your favorite part?
Hello, everyone. You're watching or listening to the Filmcast. This is our review of The Fablemans, the new movie by Steven Spielberg that's out in theaters right now. I'm going to read the plot summary from IMDb. Growing up in a post-World War II era Arizona, young Sammy Fableman aspires to become a filmmaker as he reaches adolescence and explores how the power of films can help him see the truth. We are all fans of Steven Spielberg here on the podcast, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. I have to confess to you that when I heard the premise of this movie, it felt a little bit self-indulgent to me.
I groaned out loud.
A little
You
bit
know?
like,
Yeah.
oh, a semi-autobiographical movie by Steven Spielberg about the magic of movies. Do we really need this? For me, the answer ultimately was yes. But I'm curious, Divin Hardwar, what did you think of The Fablemans?
Yeah, I mean, do we need it? That's kind of a tough question. I would say I think it's a very solid coming of age story, and it has some tremendous performances here too. Like Michelle Williams, amazing as always as the matriarch of this family, who's kind of the more creative person. And Paul Dano is Sammy Fableman's the Spielberg stand-in. He is the father, and he's the more technical, serious-minded guy. And there is a great like running theme of just the power of cinema through this movie. I think maybe a bit too much, like it never really stops, and they just keep hammering it home and home and home so much. So I feel like this is one I'll allow Spielberg to like just be kind of give in and like show us his full heart when it comes to the power of movies. At the same time, I don't think this movie actually reveals much to us, about who he is as an artist. I've heard these stories before, and I'm not going to say much if you haven't heard like his history and what his family, what he experienced with his family. But I've heard some of this history before, and it does it makes sense how that influences the way he approached some of his early movies in particular, and the way his movies have kind of explored the idea of families who are with divorced parents and things like that. So it kind of makes sense, but also I've been reading those press stories forever, and a lot of the ideas in this movie and things that they show, we have seen in so many other Spielberg movies. I feel like we learn so much more about Spielberg from something like in Close Encounters, or certainly a movie like Schindler's List or something. I feel like all of his projects reveal something to us, and this one, which is the thing that is supposed to be the sort of like, I don't know, the key to unlocking his creative spirit and everything. I don't feel like it really gives me that much. It's just like, hey, cinema is very powerful and it really shaped this guy's life, and I think we're all better for it. I'm not sure this project is the sort of like awakening, like the sort of like decoding key for understanding Spielberg that I wanted it to be, but certainly a good coming of age story.
I mean, here's some things you can say about Steven Spielberg that are very complimentary. First of all, as far as I can tell, the guy is
Literally
still,
everything. Yeah.
Yeah, literally everything. I mean,
who has ever said anything complimentary about Steven Spielberg, David?
It's true. I mean, the guy's in his
We could-
70s. He's still working his ass off. He is making movies of an incredibly high variety.
For sure.
Do you
West
know?
Side Story was last year.
Yes.
And
Incredible. West Side Story,
Yeah.
The Post, Bridge of Spies, Lincoln, Ready Player One. I don't love all those movies, but like he is still taking big swings. He still has an earnestness about him. And here's another thing that I think is very underrated. He is working with new actors almost every single time. Like the guy who plays young Steven Spielberg in this movie, I think his name is Gabriel LaBelle.
He's
Who plays
amazing.
Sammy Fableman.
He's great.
He's awesome.
Yeah.
The guy has, I think, 9 credits to his name, right? Like, there's people who, there's directors who often like settle in with a nice rhythm. They like work with the same actors over and over again because it's comfortable for them. Spielberg is still going out. He's scouting out like the next up and coming young talent. Like so many new people I was introduced to in West Side Story and in this movie that like I'd never heard of before. Obviously, he still has mainstays like Paul Dano and Michelle
sure.
Williams, but like he's still going for it, and there's an earnestness to his work that endures. It's very earnest. A lot of his stuff really wears its heart on it. The BFG is an example. Did not like that movie at all, but like he's still putting out movies of a kind, of a type, of a variety,
Yeah.
of an earnestness, and with like up and coming young cast that like
Mhm,
very few
mhm.
other directors are doing these days.
I don't think
think-
Ready Player One is a great story, but he certainly improved on the book,
Mhm.
with just like his level and his vision.
I,
Yeah.
I think
He's
I think
using
this,
his considerable power for good is like I think what I'm saying. In terms of like storytelling and whether we like the movies or not, like it's totally up for debate. But I do admire that this is how he's choosing to spend his time these days. Jeff, what were you going to say?
I think this movie makes a case for why he is so earnest,
Mhm.
why he
Yeah.
has earnestness as a quality in his filmmaking, why he wears his heart on his sleeve. I think that's one of the takeaways from this movie is that it's explaining that.
Yeah. Well, Jeff Canado, why don't you tell us your overall thoughts on The Fabelmans?
Well, Dave, I guess you could say my thoughts on The Fabelmans are best summed up in the form of a limerick. You ready for this one?
I hope.
Dissecting what is a stable fam, directed like only he's able, and though it contains great stuff, it remains feeling too much like a fable, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you just rhyme and fam and man? I think is what
Yes,
happened.
I
just there?
did. Because
You
you know
also
why?
used-
Because I'm a
Yeah.
professional at this.
He knows what he's doing. But also you use the other, the meaning of fable, which is something I was going to allude to as well. This does seem like, the storytellers. That is
Yeah.
what this movie is about. Yeah.
Well,
different spelling, but yeah.
Different spelling, but yeah.
I don't think it's a coincidence that he calls it The Fabelmans, right?
Yeah.
When it's autobiographical.
We should point out that Steven Spielberg and Tony Kushner co-wrote the screenplay for this
Yeah.
movie.
Correct. And only the third movie he's got a writing credit on, right? Of his films, I think. Close Encounters being 2 and AI being 3. I think is that correct? This movie is big and sprawling and long and about a whole bunch of different things and about one thing over and over again, but also about a whole bunch of other. It gets sidetracked for long periods of time. The movie's like about movies, and it's like not about movies for a long time, and it's big and sprawling and I admire it in so many ways, and it's beautifully directed and beautifully acted and evocative. And by the end, I was a little misty. And the last shot of the movie, which I can't wait to talk about, is just awesome. And
that whole final sequence, beautiful.
Yeah, it's so great. It's so great. And there's so many incredible. Judd Hirsch needs an Academy Award right now. For
who knew he was this incredible?
Dude, Judd Hirsch. The movie is worth watching for the 10 minutes of Judd Hirsch alone.
100%. 100%.
He needs a Best Supporting Actor Academy Award immediately. Like it's so amazing when he just walks in and like takes over the movie for 10 minutes.
I love him and I love that scene. For me, that is one of those things where it's like, you're here pounding out the themes again. Like you have been trucked in to again, re-architect what this is really about. But he's very good at it.
This is the thrust of my review, which is I understand that this is intentional. I understand this is what Kushner and Spielberg are up to, right? They've named the movie The Fabelmans. They are attempting to spin a fable. And I think by the very nature of fable, things aren't necessarily naturalistic or grounded. Or they are larger than life. They are legendary, right? And while I know that is intentional, it also really doesn't work for me. No one talks like a human being in this movie.
Oh, man.
And none of the moments feel real. In fact, for the first, I didn't know much about this movie going into it, as I often don't. And I thought maybe we were going to get like this was a flashback that we were starting with. And so the first 10, 20 minutes of this movie, I'm thinking, wow, this feels like a really over-the-top flashback. I can't wait till we get to the more modern moments so that we can stop this like stylized, overly melodramatic delivery that everyone
especially Michelle Williams, because like she's putting on a voice that is very
everybody in this movie. I mean, again, I think the performances are wonderful, and clearly they've been directed into them. But Paul Dano he's doing he's doing a very strange. It's not just the delivery; it's the script, like the words that are said, the way the movie is shot. Everything is delivered like it is through the lens of nostalgia. It is a director looking back on his life, and not everything. This isn't called the Spielbergs, right? This isn't meant to be a biopic or a projection of fact. It is meant to be this through the lens of the camera, looking back with romance, capital R, like this romantic notion of how he was raised and his parents as these larger than life figures. But man, it just really doesn't work tonally for me. The way this movie feels, it just never feels like I'm watching real human beings in real scenarios. That said, if I accept that, what is happening is evocative and often beautiful and often heart-wrenching. But like, there are large sequences in high school where no one behaves like a actual high schooler. No one says a word that a human being would say. It is all like this. I mean, fable. It is a fable. It is written like a children's story.
You got the bullies.
Exactly.
You got the popular girls. I would say a large portion of the early part of this movie is about this young Spielberg stand-in setting up a train set, and then starting to use it to overcome his fears and eventually filming it. The movie feels like a lot of these characters are just these sort of like little dolls or little like play animals or people that he's constructing to kind of re-envision his past and everything. They don't feel like human beings because they are just the action figures of his past.
I think that's well said. I agree 100%. It does feel like a filmmaker not really addressing what's happening, but sort of like it does feel like, sitting down with grandpa and him telling you tales and you being like, is that how it really happened, grandpa? Because that doesn't sound real, and there is a romance to that. There's a lyricism to that. There is, it feels lilting and beautiful. And by the end, like, I was emotional and I felt that the notion of film as a medium was elevated, and I was inspired by that on a certain level. But ultimately, the movie just feels false, and I never connected to it in any sense other than this sort of distanced appreciation, rather than being actually drawn in to these real human moments. None of it felt like a real human moment to me.
It's funny because there's a really dramatic point in the movie too, where Sammy envisions himself going and shooting his family, like actually going through this emotional moment. And that's, again, this entire movie. It's that remove where he's more comfortable behind the camera rather than putting the truth in front of the camera, I guess. Yeah.
Jeff, if this whole thing had been revealed to be like old man Fableman sitting on his rocking chair telling his kids about his upbringing, like, would that have like improved it for you though? Like,
I mean, I think ultimately it is that,
yeah,
right?
It is that. There's just but we bring the metatextual element into it of it's Steven Spielberg doing this for us, right?
I mean, I think the spirit of your question is kind of what I was trying to get at. Like, by the end of this movie, I go, man, that was quite an experience. And I was moved and transported and invested in individual things. But in the process of watching the movie, like moment to moment, I just kept going, why am I being like pushed away from this experience? Why is everything being like told at me rather than including me? Why does the whole world feel so presentational and false and lacking in any kind of grounded realism? So that was the course that I had throughout it. And by the end, even though it didn't have that bookend that you're talking about, I did get that sense of like, okay, I understand what we were doing here, but I don't think that ultimately it achieved what it could have if it had just been more earnest and authentic, through the whole journey.
Yeah, there's a difference between earnestness and authenticity, I'd say. And like, this definitely leans more on the earnest side of it. And also, like, this very like idealized vision Spielberg has of his parents and who they were as people, and they're very much archetypes. You've got the creative one, you've got the you've got the more like intellectual engineer type. One thing I really appreciated, the trailers for this movie really made it seem like his father, Paul Dano's character, would be the sort of like person holding it back, right? The sort of like person who can't envision doing this as a career, and you're wasting your time with this hobby. And I think the movie does actually give that character a lot more to do, but I also think it gives the mother, it kind of strips the mother at the end too. And we could talk about some of that stuff in spoilers. I feel like we lose her entirely, like once a major event happens, and meanwhile the father continues to be more supportive in a way.
Dave, just to put one more button on my point here,
Sure.
if I may. I think it's ironic that I feel more connection and truth, for lack of a better term, looking at the family, the parents in Close Encounters and E.T.
Yep.
And I think they're more revelatory about Steven Spielberg's actual upbringing than this movie. Like, though there's such fantastical elements, in both cases, aliens, right? But I relate more to what's happening because it doesn't feel inflated or romanticized. It feels like, oh my gosh, there's this supernatural element, but it feels real in those cases.
Well, this is like a once in a blue moon occurrence, but I'm the person on the podcast that loved this movie the most. I'm usually the one dragging you guys down into the muck with me, but this time
the Eternals of Spielberg movies.
It is in fact the Eternals of Spielberg movies. I loved The Fabelmans. I thought it was a tremendous movie, and it's because I think I have been, I'm gonna acknowledge like what I'm bringing to it personally, which is that
you were a young Jewish kid who grew up growing up.
There's a couple of sort of things aligning right now in my own personal life, like just occurrences aligning right now in my own personal life that like are, or things in the world that are aligning that are like relevant to me, right? Like number one is the industry, in my opinion, is in a rough place. Like the movie industry is in a rough place. Theatrical film going is in a rough place. There is massive media consolidation going on right now. The number of studios that exist in Hollywood gets less and less each year, or fewer and fewer each year. Amazon bought MGM, Disney bought Fox. More consolidation will probably happen. This limits the types of stories that are going to be told, the number of stories that are going to be told. And streaming has kind of destroyed all the old business models of what it means to make a movie. And so I think a lot about these things and about like, I think I had originally said like I was hoping the Filmcast we could be sort of on board for the slow decline of movies, and then with COVID it was like, oh, is it going to be a fast decline now? And it turns out it was a blip, and things are kind of normalizing again. We'll see how well Avatar 2 does.
I mean, people are turning out. Glass Onion is in theaters for a week, and all I hear from people is crowded theaters and people loving that movie. And maybe Netflix should think about letting that be.
They left money on the table. They left money on the table.
Wakanda forever.
It is a perfect Glass Onion is a perfect like Thanksgiving. Let's all take the family to see it, and it's sad that it's only going to be in theaters for 1 week. Okay. That coupled with, I have worked for the last 10 years in corporate life while trying to like do creative things on the side. And I've done all that stuff for long enough that I finally have like a little bit of breathing room to kind of try to figure out like where, what I want to do next and to consider it more carefully. And how creative I want to be in terms of my daily life and what I want to do with my daily life. And so all those things are intersecting in a way that make me really nostalgic and emotional for the stuff that's depicted in this film.
Mm-hmm.
That it's like, hey, there was a magic to movies. We're shining, and it's explained
in the first 2
verbally,
minutes
like
of the movie.
Explicitly in the first 5 minutes.
Have you heard of persistence and vision, kid? This is what parents talk to kids about.
But there is a magic to like, hey, they used to shine a bright light that was so freaking bright it would like
Mhm.
illuminate the whole room, and then like run stuff through it 24 times a second, and it would make people feel things and experience things, and like
Yeah.
people dedicate their life to making this stuff at great cost to themselves, you know, um and so anyway, like I when I went into this movie, I was like, oh, I'm not gonna like this. This is gonna feel like complete self-indulgent wankery. Like this, I don't. I went in like thinking I would not like this movie. Ended up loving it. I do think the first half is much stronger than the second half.
Yes.
In my opinion,
Absolutely.
like the first half, just the first 75 minutes, and there's a certain like midpoint when it kind of ends, is like just amazing. I was just like, oh, this is so good. And then the second half, it really kind of loses momentum a little bit, and is not as strong, but is still very good. But really, it reminds you, like, I think it's a really valuable cultural relic. 20 years from now, when people don't even go to see movies anymore, or it's all Marvel stuff all the time, we can point to this movie and say, like, hey, there was a time when, like, we used to go to theaters together in huge crowds and watch these like bold original stories that people physically built these models and like, you know, all the stuff that Spielberg and many filmmakers love about the tactile nature of filmmaking that's going to be gone, you know, once we move to all CG and the volume and stuff like that. This movie is a testament that like, hey, once upon a time, we loved these things as a society. And and for me,
It's not
that's
like
really
it's not like we're not making things anymore. We're just making them different, right?
we're
Like,
making them differently and
Yeah.
with less soul than they used to.
I don't know.
And
Debatable.
also
Yeah.
the Fablemans like kind of bombed at the box office this weekend. You know, it's like people
It's
like
harsh.
aren't
Yeah.
seeing these. They're not going to movies to see these kinds of movies that much anymore.
I
And
would
so
argue, like, who is this movie for?
people like
is-
the people on this podcast, I would
Like
argue. And
us.
even we
Like
did not
people
love
like
it.
us.
You know,
And yeah,
anyway.
not fully loved it, but also I think about like this is not the only movie to like just explore the power of cinema and our relationship to it. And for me, like the big one is like Cinema Paradiso.
I was gonna say this is up there for me with Cinema Paradiso.
And this is where I say shenanigans,
Mm,
sir.
yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
that is a movie where even the score alone will rip my heart out right
Mhm.
from me.
It's a great. It's
Whereas
one
this
of the greatest scores of all time.
one of the greatest stories of all time, Ennio Morricone, but also a tremendous movie about the power of cinema and the cost of like following your dreams and things like that. Whereas this one, I don't know, maybe it was too tied to Spielberg. Like the other thing is I'm unclear as to why it's not just the Spielbergs. You know, maybe it's for liability reasons, and so you're not like
Yeah.
calling people out directly. But I felt that disconnect there because it's like, yeah, it's Spielberg saying, yeah, this is kind of about my childhood. This is inspired by my childhood. Here's this family, the Fablemans, right? And we're just like, there is an inherent disconnect there that I didn't feel in a lot of other movies like this, especially Cinema Paradiso. But there's Empire of Light out right now, which is Sam Mendes's movie about the power of cinema, and I also believe about how it affected his life too. We're getting a lot of these things. We've got James Gray's Armageddon Time, which I haven't seen yet too.
I
not
think it's
unusual.
like it's you know, my interpretation is it's like the dying gasps of this era of like,
Mhm.
you know, people are going to look back on this movie 50 years from now and be like, I can't believe we used to make movies. I can't believe that was an industry. Like we used to make movies. That's my suspicion
Sure,
anyway.
sure.
So anyway, but I'm sorry it didn't work as well for you guys. I loved it. It was amazing in my opinion. It has weaknesses. It's very, very didactic. And I think you're right that like people don't speak like humans. Also, Steven Spielberg's last two movies have been about high schoolers that are like literally psychotic. Like,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like
True.
like they would literally murder you, and I'm like, okay, weird. But anyway, despite all those things, I really loved it. We have a lot to discuss. Yeah,
honestly,
go ahead, Jeff.
I feel like a lot of my problems with this movie are shared with West Side Story. Like that movie also is like gorgeous to look at and rousing and clearly made with an incredible amount of skill, but just feels like a limp, soulless. I mean, okay, that's not how I feel about Fablemans, but you know, it doesn't feel like, never felt like a thing I could connect to or real people. And I honestly, I feel like there might be a problem with Spielberg in his, you know, advanced career where he's getting more detached from his subjects. And
I almost
know.
feel like he's 75 years old now, and the story is we've heard he's wanted to do West Side Story forever, like forever, for decades, and it feels like he's getting the chance to do these projects he spent years envisioning in his head, right? So he kind I love certainly the dance sequences and the big musical set pieces of West Side Story, but it feels like these are stories he's had in his head for a while, and the power of like, okay, how do I communicate this better to other people, or how do I bring people in has maybe been the thing he hasn't been thinking about as much,
I think it's
'cause
worth
yeah.
interrogating like why these movies don't work for you, and I think you've done a great
Mhm.
job of articulating why. I do have to point out they are both extremely critically beloved films. Like they're both over
Oh,
90%
Of
movies.
course.
People love them and
I
don't
don't
have the
doubt
issues
that.
that you guys have with them.
Yeah.
But I do think it's worth like I do think you guys raised some good issues. But I just want to like call. I don't think like the preeminent opinion out there
I
is
don't
that he's
he
having
has
these
not had a
problems.
badly reviewed movie in a very long time.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yes,
Anyway,
Spielberg movie being reviewed well, for sure. Good
yeah.
thing. It's more like what is happening, especially with these last 2 films where I do feel that disconnect, Jeff.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
I'm kind of
Yeah.
on the same wavelength there.
All right. Let's
And just before we go to spoilers, one more time, I want to call out Gabriel LaBelle, who plays the young Sammy Fableman,
Mhm.
and is just, I think the kid's going to have a huge future. He's so good,
Mhm.
so good in this movie.
Yeah, it reminded me of watching West Side Story and seeing what's that gentleman's name? Mike Feist,
Yeah,
who
Mike
plays
Weiss,
Riff
the
in the
bad
movie. It
dude.
was like, oh, I've
Mhm.
never seen this guy before. He's
Mhm.
incredible, and hopefully goes on to do bigger and better things.
I kind of got a sense of like 400 Blows from this movie too. Like
Mm.
there is the actor who plays Antoine Duanel. Like
Yeah. Similar. All right, folks. Well, why don't we get to spoilers for The Fableman starting right now? You know, guys, this week I watched a Steven Spielberg movie where the main character was watching and manipulating video footage and then discovers a shocking secret, all while classical music plays in the background.
Uh-huh.
But enough about Minority Report. Let's talk about
Well
spoilers
done.
for The Fablemans, guys. Boom goes the dynamite.
That's a good one.
Virtually identical movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have more, they have more they have very little dissimilar between these two movies.
Yeah.
So that all that stuff, first of all, it was a little odd to me that a lot of the most revelatory stuff in the movie comes from documentary footage when Steven Spielberg like isn't general, like he's done stuff after Schindler's List with the Shoah Foundation and stuff, but like in general he's not like well known for documentary footage.
Right.
I do think it goes like generally to the theme of movies can reveal things that like you didn't know were there, but it did strike me as a little weird, the documentary, like the revelation that his mom is having an emotional affair is revealed through this kind of family footage. Incredible scene though, just like
Yeah.
it blew my mind watching that scene and the way it's done, and like
the tactility of the seeing, the actual editing machine,
seeing
everything, and the strips. Like,
and on that note, one of the things I love about this movie is, and this is a huge problem with movies about movies, right? Is a lot of the footage that they show that the people make doesn't look realistic. It doesn't look like footage
Right.
that was actually shot. In The Fablemans, it looks like this guy actually used the 16 millimeter. I don't know how realistic that is, but like they show him like actually physically editing the thing. They talk about like the cool little tricks, like poking the pinpricks in the film and all this stuff, and it feels all very plausible. Like this kid could have actually made the stuff that you see on screen.
Sure.
And that in and of itself is like a big accomplishment, because most of the time, I'll give you just an example off the top of my head. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, like on that, in that they
one
like
of the most
make,
elaborately produced shows.
Indeed,
on
the
television.
same equal budget to a Spielberg movie.
Well,
exactly.
in that show, they make like these like Lethal Weapon sequels or whatever, and you watch the footage, and it's very goofy and rough, but it's like it looks like it was actually done with a professional camera crew and all this. And so many times when they're like when they're sweeting these movies, it looks like not someone in the actual movie could have made. But in this movie, it's like it feels very authentic. Like the filmmaking feels very authentic. All that stuff was so amazing when he's shooting with the soldiers, and they all like get up and go and like play dead on the other. It's like this is like it's so.
I love that scene
it's like,
where his dad's like, "Hey, could you do the thing for your mom?" He's like, "I have 40 people coming tomorrow to shoot," and he's like, "Yeah, I know, but like this is more important." He's like, 40 people, Dad. It's so good.
Yeah, I know. I will. So I love all the filmmaking, all the behind the scenes. It's so great. I will say the final scene with the bully. I will agree with you guys. Was like pretty ridiculous. Like,
I feel like that may be one of the highlights.
oh
of the
really?
movie for me.
Because for me, I was like, that's when my suspension.
That's
of
when
disbelief.
that's when you ran up. That's when I perked up, and I'm like, oh, because this movie, it's revealing something.
The
Mhm.
film that he makes with the bully, that all makes sense to me. Like, and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
idea of like, first of all, I love how he takes the screws to the guy who's like the most virulently racist. Like, yes, humiliate that guy. Good.
Mhm.
But then he like makes this bully out to be an Adonis. Again, the footage looks great. It like looks plausible and it's
Yep.
very. You can see like, oh, he's so creative. Like he's making ice cream look like bird poop. Like that's very funny.
Mhm.
But then the bully comes and gives this very like didactic speech about how like that's not me at all. I have all these insecurities that you, the viewer, didn't really know about. And I'm like, okay,
I think that
like,
actor plays it really well. Like for
all
me,
the
the
acting is great. Yeah,
the
but-
Judd Hirsch thing was far more like, listen, I'm your crazy uncle. I'm here for one night. I need to tell you your whole life. So listen
Oh,
to me.
I loved it. I
Oh
loved
man.
him.
yeah, I
And-
did
oh,
love that as well. But yeah.
By the
so-
way, your grandma's ghost said I was coming. Therefore, like just a lot of stuff wrapped in there. The bully thing felt like we don't always see ourselves, right? Or we don't always know ourselves very well. And that bully's revelation about that. And also the racist asshole. I mean, they're all racist assholes, but the instigator, the true like anti-Semite comes in, and the way the bully just like kind of steps in and deflects and pushes the kid out the way and he runs out. Like he goes from being an enabler of
Yes.
this behavior and just saying no, or at least in this instance. And I
I
found
was
that
on board with it. I was all
Yeah.
on board with it until the bully gives that long speech. Like,
yeah.
when the bully like watches it and he has this realization, he's like,
Mhm.
"Oh my god!" Like, that's not how I see my child. That all worked for me. Then
Yeah.
he like has a talk with him that's very emotional
Yeah.
and over the top, in my opinion, and very
I would
earnest, very
rather
earnest,
keep that
you know?
and lose some of the stuff earlier in this movie too, because
yeah. I get, you know, different things work for us. Like for
Mhm.
me and Jeff, like the Judd Hirsch stuff was like a home run. You know,
I mean,
It's
the
Hold
like-
Judd Hirsch stuff is
yeah.
good, but it's also like talk about like telegraphing what is going to be happening. It's like, oh no, grandma's ghost, the curse. Judd Hirsch appears, a wild Judd Hirsch appears, and you know, shit's gonna go crazy. And it's basically like what we were assuming. I think the quiet stuff in the Judd Hirsch scene where he talks about, oh, your mother, was playing, and his sister, the grandmother, was not really encouraging of it. I think that whole discussion was great, but when he goes into the like, it's about art and family, and art's always gonna win. Maybe
I
a bit
think,
too much.
I-
Yeah.
I think it articulates something that like Jeff and
Yes.
I feel very
Yes.
acutely, right? Which is
And
that like
Mhm.
anytime
Art
you
will
try to
destroy
be
you.
creative, try to be creative, it's it. A, the family doesn't respect it. B, it like removes you
Mhm.
from the family in a way. Like
Yeah.
it is antithetical to family in some ways because you're kind of committing your heart and soul to something that is not the family.
Well, not
And-
the family, but also not practical, right? Not
Yeah,
productive
it's
in
both
the way
those
a
things.
lot
It's
of
both
people
those
say.
things.
So
It's
yeah.
both those things. Yeah. Anyway,
Mhm.
Jeff, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I also, it was the moment in the movie where it being a fable worked best for me. This
Mhm.
this thing that is very much a classical notion of a sort of a soothsayer coming in and laying it all out and saying, "Hey,
Sure.
this is this is your life. This is your lot in life. You are like me. We are the same. Put your head in the lion's mouth." And that wasn't art. It was not having it bite me was art. It's like.
Yeah,
It's all. I just loved all of it, man.
I loved it. I loved it too. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the point where the movie, I felt like it earned its sort of
Mhm.
over the top kind of larger than life notion.
I wish
And Judd Hirsch, I've
Mhm.
enjoyed Judd Hirsch's movies, but like I was like, oh man, this guy can freaking act.
Yeah,
like
he's
in
spectacular.
a
There's
capital
certainly-
A way.
I don't have the names of the movie. I felt like he's been powerful in a bunch of things at this point. I do want to point out the final scene, the
Yeah.
John
Well,
Ford
before we get there,
scene.
I want to talk about it. Before we get there, though,
Mhm.
I just want to say I like how Steven Spielberg just randomly took a bat to, conservative Christian girls in high school. Just like
Dude.
randomly, it's just like okay,
So good.
yeah.
I mean, I'm
it's-
sure
so
he
funny.
experienced.
Yeah,
a couple
no,
of them,
for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not saying he was wrong. I'm just saying like it's like oh wow, I didn't expect that in this movie, but here it is,
Yeah.
and I welcome it.
Here it is, and it's also
Um,
like wasn't fully vilified or anything either.
No,
because
no,
she ends up becoming the girlfriend, even though like I think doing that and forcing somebody to be like, okay, accept Jesus, like it's a little shitty. It's not great.
I don't think she ever made him accept
No,
Jesus.
Yeah,
she's
she
like, did you
wanted
bring
to.
Jesus into her heart, into his heart? Like it was very like pushing
But
it. Yeah.
For me, I
But
mean, I don't know.
He captured
Yeah.
how, for many Christian young people, love of Jesus is like directly adjacent to horniness in
Right.
a way that it
Yeah,
typically
yeah.
isn't depicted. And I was
And
just
the
like,
mental gymnastics that's required to do
yeah.
the thing you wanted to do in the first place, but you
Yes.
have to justify it.
you have to put it into the
through-
Jesus. Yes.
Yes, you have to go through all
Structure.
these twists and turns. So, in my opinion, it was never about him, accepting Jesus or not. I don't think she ultimately cared about. She has to do the checklist of things to be able to do the things she wanted to do with him.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Agreed.
And I've never seen that character in a movie before, and yet I've met those people. I've interacted with
I
those
know
people.
it's so good. It's very very true. I wouldn't say I've met someone exactly like that, but it definitely feels very true to like that. Feels, as with most of the movie, it feels about 20 to 30% more than what I've experienced. But it's like, it's
the caricature of that character, but I know that character.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay.
The shot of when it, like they're having all the close up, and the shot of the bed with the big heart. I was just like, oh my, it's very funny.
Yeah. When the camera pans over and you see Jesus like over the, it's really, very good. Okay, let's talk about the final scene. So in the concluding scene of this movie, which I personally think is more of a denouement than like the actual ending of the emotional story.
Sure.
The main character, Sammy Fabelman, meets legendary director John Ford. And
played by David
Lynch.
As soon as he started talking, I was like, oh,
casting. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So
who
Devindra,
do we get to play the greatest director ever, or at least of his time?
Yeah. So Devindra, what did you think of this scene?
I mean, I just thought it was very playful in a way that I wish the rest of the movie was.
I agree.
Okay? I agree. Because there's like it, and Lynch is just like leaning into it, like this hard ass, guy. It takes a minute to light the cigar and like really rebels in it too. It does feel like, man, this movie is ticking down. Like I'm watching, I'm looking at my clock. I'm like, this movie should be done about now, right? And just wasting time on something like that. But I think his whole thing is just like, where's the horizon? Here is my old school classical thinking about the horizon. That's it, kid. Get out. I need it. I would love to see like more sparks of that, or at least more of what Spielberg had gone through, at least in early Hollywood stuff. I guess like if he ever does a sequel, like maybe he will follow up with more of his Hollywood experiences. But I felt the movie wasn't as playful as it could have been, and that one scene kind of brought it home for me, at least. And then certainly the ending shot was fun.
I totally agree about the playfulness, and that ending shot is playful, right? It's the director talking to the audience, and I wish the movie embraced that more. I seeing that at the end made me go, oh my gosh, this could have been the whole movie. The whole movie could have felt like this wink, wink, nudge, nudge of the. But again, Spielberg's not interested in that until the end. That's just this kind of fun, little.
It's like a little
walk
button.
out the theater, button. But what he's much more interested in is sort of a deeper thing that I don't think he really achieves. It feels like a presentation of depth rather than a real churning of the depths to me.
I mean, hearing you guys talk about it does occur to me like this is probably something that would have been better as like a 6-part movie or something, or a 6-part miniseries. You know what I'm saying? Where you can like really dive into some of these family dynamics. I feel like we barely got to know the sisters, in this at all. And
and there's that one scene where the sister, this beautiful. It's like, oh my gosh, I want to know more about that. This actress is amazing, and it's unfortunate. And ultimately, like
Julia Butters is the name of the actor. She was, I think, the young actress in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. If you remember that scene, I think it's Brad Pitt's character talks to her, or
she's amazing in that.
Or the other guy talks to her. I don't remember. Anyway, but she's great in that movie as well. Leonardo DiCaprio, I think, actually talks to her on set. So, but yeah, I think that as I'm thinking about it, you guys are making good points about like how I do think like all the characters other than Sammy Fableman, and to some degree Sammy Fableman, are pretty thinly drawn. You know, like
Yep.
they are archetypes. They're like ideas more than they are characters. Probably Michelle Williams gets the fullest development.
Except she fully disappears like by the end. You know,
Yeah.
where she's not in their life, but I would have liked a little more. I don't know.
I think that the scene when, first of all, like the scene when he discovers her emotional affair is just really well done. The music, the way it's edited, the way it's shot, like the camera spinning around him, I thought that was all amazing. And then he plays that footage for her. I guess he's made like a short film of all the greatest hits of that, and like he plays it for her. And then the second time, you don't see the footage; you only see her reaction to the footage,
which is important.
And
it's
a brilliant moment.
beautiful.
It's a brilliant moment, and then she comes out. She's, it's a super powerful moment. It's like a top most emotional moment of any movie this year, in my opinion.
My brain is so broken, though. I couldn't help but think of there's a TikTok meme, and a great one, that uses the Incredibles score. It was just like, there's the TikTok about like, did Scar eat Mufasa? And it's somebody like going through the details. Is he holding a lion skull? And it's the Incredibles theme, like the villain theme, kind of building up. Da 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 da. It's basically that whole thing. I can't wait for the edit on this, because that's essentially that's what that scene is.
Yeah, you're right. That does seem like it might become you know how like there's this thing of like taking extremely serious, upsetting scenes from movies and converting them into memes. So like one popular example of that is in Marriage Story. Adam, what's his name? Adam Driver, like punching the wall. Like people have used that as a funny meme now.
Yeah.
So Michelle Williams, like learning that her son has uncovered the, evidence of her affair is going to be probably the next one. But anyway, any other thoughts on The Fabelmans? I loved it. It's good to hear your guys' disagreement and kind of I'm
glad I watched it. I do like it overall. It's just, I was expecting more. Like, the idea of Spielberg making a semi-autobiographical movie about his own life, maybe I just wanted a little more. But hey, I'm glad he got to tell this story at the least.
I think it relies a lot on aesthetics. But you're talking about one of the greatest filmmakers alive, so he can. Like, there's a scene when like the young kid is like holding the movie in his hand.
That's it.
It's being projected on his hand.
That's the entire movie right there.
It's like, okay, that's pretty on the nose imagery, but it's also really beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
it's also really beautiful, and it's like, okay, like, I get it, and I'm cool with it. I'm cool with it. So anyway, I'm sorry you guys didn't like it quite as much, but I'm glad you guys still enjoyed watching it, and I think people should check it out. It's The Fabelmans, and at the end of the day, it's pretty impressive that Steven Spielberg made a movie. Thank you so much for watching this video of the Filmcast. Check out these other videos that we have available, and be sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to get other videos from us in the future.
You can also go to thefilmcast.com to catch all of our audio podcast versions of all of our episodes.
And support this podcast at patreon.com/filmpodcast, where you can sign up for ad-free episodes and exclusive After Darks.
Thanks so much to everyone who makes the Filmcast possible.